G'day guys, this is Tier and welcome back to the channel. We are kickstarting my return back with my main build, an absolute staple on the channel that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. It is one of, if not the best, min-maxed unarmed build in Fallout 76. It is Freya the Queen Killer, my bloodied unarmed / brawler build. If you want to skip ahead at all, then the timestamps to all chapters of the build will be provided on screen and in the description below, so you can find and navigate to the information that you need. Additionally, in the description and pinned comment, you will find a written version of the build via the Nukes and Dragons website, if that's easier to follow alongside the video. This video will be diving into special stats, legendary and regular perks, mutations, weapons, armor, and some build-specific buffs and tips that you might find handy. Now, this is so far my absolute perfected version of this unarmed build. After years of tweaking and hyper-optimization, I think I've done right by the build and playstyle and have created something truly special for you guys. Now, straight off the bat, you've got to know that the purpose of this build, the Queen Killer, is to simultaneously achieve the highest unarmed damage as humanly possible while also keeping ourselves alive by becoming as tanky as possible. In doing this, we want to make sure that we are not sacrificing any damage potential. Basically, we want to be able to take a massive amount of punishment and dish it straight back to the enemy tenfold. We want to min-max towards having the most strength points and brutally high unarmed damage potential as we possibly can. And to do this, we need to become a low health bloodied build. It just synergizes so well with our build objective that it's impossible to pass up. You will rarely see an endgame melee or unarmed build not utilizing the benefits that come with low health and bloodied. This build will safely walk around with 48 strength just by existing in its base state. And let's not forget that each point of strength does equal out to be plus 5% melee damage and plus 10% unarmed damage in this game. So it's kind of highly important to make sure we have the most strength as humanly possible. Additionally, the build can tank a large amount of damage types, playing a kind of hybrid role of both DPS and tank. Now, if you've seen the previous iterations of this build, then I think you're really going to like the improvements I've made here. I've somehow managed to squeeze out even more damage potential than I thought I could, while also allowing for more quality of life and survivability. Now, without further ado, let's get into the build. So let's start off with the special stats, and keep in mind to fully utilize this perfected version of this build that I will be showing you, I'm going to ask you guys to fully max out 2 legendary special cards. But for right now, as you can see, at the base version of the build, you will want to make sure you distribute your special points out as follows: 10 strength, 2 perception, 9 endurance, 7 charisma, 3 intelligence, 11 agility, and 14 luck. These are your absolute base special stats before any modifications come into play. These are your stats at the very bare bones of the build. Now, with the 2 legendary special perks taken into consideration, like I said, you can choose whichever 2 you want, but for this build, we will be choosing strength and endurance. You will boost those by 5, making strength 15 and endurance 14. So keep that in mind. But for now, just know that to translate this build fully, you will need those 2 special cards maxed out. Now, in previous iterations of the build, I purely utilized the legendary strength card as a damage booster, giving me 50% extra unarmed damage, and I did not allow myself to utilize its benefits with regular perk cards, giving myself 5 more perk points to choose from. I now feel that it is the wrong move and I should use those 5 perk points to greater effect, which I feel like I have done here. Essentially, with those 2 legendary special cards, we have 10 extra points to play around with, and boy, do we make good use of them. Now, when everything is said and done, and you are benefiting from everything that I will show you in this build video, absolutely everything that we want for this build, that being you being on a team, low health, unyielding, armor, perks, full hydration and satiation with our food, so on and so forth, all of your special stats should be the following if you followed this guide to the utmost letter: 52 strength, 22 perception, 25 endurance, 25 charisma, 18 intelligence, 25 agility, and 32 luck. Like I said, once everything is said and done and you have copied this build, then that should be what your special stats are looking like when you have every static bonus applied that is not a consumable or buff, which we'll get into later. And I think we can all agree it is quite impressive. Now, hypothetically, we could boost strength up to 57, potentially even higher, if we do the old method with legendary strength, but that would require we sacrifice a few perks in our arsenal kit, which I don't really want to get rid of. I find them too useful. If you do though, go nuts and try that out for yourself. Anyways, next up we have the main course, the meat and potatoes of the build. This is what makes the build so powerful. Perks are the most important part of any build. And if you're into min-maxing like me, then you'll be pleased to see that not a single perk point is wasted. As stated at the start of the video, the min-max goal is to deal as much damage as humanly possible with our fists. In addition to dealing maximum damage, we want to ensure that we have fantastic survivability and ways to tank damage as well as sustain health regeneration before ultimately dying. Since obviously we are playing a very high risk reward, low health build, we need to play fast and loose and get up close and personal to deal the damage, and then we need to ensure that we do not die. And that's hard enough normally if you're a ranged build, but since we are a melee build needing to be right up in the enemy's face to deal the damage, kind of makes it even more difficult. Like I said, this build is high risk and high reward. A kind of Prince Rupert glass cannon, if you will. If you get that reference, then you're a legend. So now let's go check out the perks. We're going to start off in strength. Obviously we're going to check out Barbarian. That's going to give us 80 damage resistance because we definitely have enough strength to qualify for max rank right there. Then we're going to take max rank of Iron Fist, 20% extra damage for our punching attacks. This counts for all of our unarmed weapons. We're going to take blocker, take 45% less damage from melee attacks. This is very important. We're in melee range with people, so that means that they're also going to be within melee range of us. They're going to be attacking us with melee attacks, and this is going to knock out almost half of that damage straight off the bat. You need this if you're a melee build. Next up is Incisor. Your melee and unarmed weapons ignore 75% of your target's armor. This is a fantastic and a must-have perk for your melee builds. You're basically going to cut through almost all of your enemy's armor. It's like it doesn't even have any, so chuck this one on, you can't go without it. And finally, in strength, we are going to equip Martial Artist. This makes our melee weapons weigh 60% less, so we really don't have to worry too much about inventory management. Almost all of our melee weapons weigh 1, 2, or maybe 3 pounds at the most. And massive bonus, we can swing them 30% faster. That helps massively with our DPS, so chuck it on. Then from there we have Perception, and in there we have max rank of Grenadier. This is going to increase our explosives by twice the radius. We mainly have this because it directly synergizes with our legendary perks, which we'll get to in a moment, and it synergizes with a few of our mutations, that being Unstable Isotope, Electrically Charged, and our legendary cards being Exploding Palm and Collateral Damage. Basically, in the code, every explosion has a inner and outer radius. The inner radius is just basically how close you have to be to the center of the explosion to receive the maximum amount of damage that the explosion will give you. Grenadier just basically doubles that. So we're spending 1 extra point to make all of our many melee explosions have double the radius and basically apply its damage to a further area of effect. Now you might be wondering, why don't we have Demolition Expert? That's because we can't really justify spending 5 points into a perk that will only really boost Exploding Palm and Collateral Damage a little bit, and yes, it does affect the Electrically Charged and Unstable Isotope as well, but it's not really worth it. We just want the radius to be a little bit bigger, and to spend 1 point on that, I think it's worth it. However, if you do not think it's worth it, then feel free to lower Perception back down to 1, chuck on Glow Sight, and replace that 1 extra point into Agility, where you will spend it on Gun Fu rank 1. This is also massively beneficial, and I do switch between the two of these depending on how I'm feeling, if I want to see more explosions or if I want my VATs to be a little bit more smoother with that VAT swap ability. Next we have Endurance. Now this got a bit of an overhaul from my previous iteration of this build. We're going to be taking Life Giver, which gives us 45 health points, massive boost to our health, and obviously in having the 4 points of endurance needed to equip it, it also gives us 20 health points on top of that. Next, max rank of Ghoulish. We're in the Wasteland, and this is going to make the radiation that the Wasteland and its creatures deal towards us heal us. So very beneficial in a Ghoul Horde, or maybe the Scorchbeast Queen with its Radiation Aura. There's just a plethora of Wasteland creatures that do deal melee radiation or Radiation Aura damage, whatever it may be. Radiation is normally a subcomponent to a lot of enemy attacks. This just makes it heal us. We're going to be healing just by ourselves no matter what we do, because you take radiation damage all the time in this game. Next up is max rank of Solar Powered. You could maybe swap this out, and I'll go over that in alternate perks for this build, but at max rank we gain 3 to strength and endurance during the daytime, which is between 6 AM and 6 PM. So 3 extra points of strength, that is 30% extra unarmed damage, kind of hard to pass up, and 3 extra endurance, that's just 15 extra hit points, so you deal more damage and you're harder to kill ever so slightly, which synergizes quite well with our build goal here. Next up is max rank of Fireproof. Taking this will make you take 45% less damage from explosions and flame attacks. The explosions, it is fully working. You take 45% less explosive damage, which does count towards a plethora of things in this game, including the Scorchbeast Sonic Breath attack. Hopefully in the future they'll make it so this perk makes you take 45% less damage from actual fire damage inducing attacks, including the dots. Next up we have Radical. I mean, why would you not take this on a low health melee build? It synergizes perfectly with us. If you're below 20% health, you get 5 strength. That's just 50% extra unarmed damage. Take it. Next up in Charisma, we have Stranger Numbers. This is a massive perk, believe it or not. If you're on a team, which you absolutely will be in all builds in this game from now on, including this. So it makes all of your mutations 25% stronger, or the positive effects anyway, if your teammates are mutated too. Next up, we have max rank of Suppressor. This is a very, very overlooked and underrated tanking card, and also group card, because whenever you're damaging an enemy, it's just going to make that enemy deal 30% less damage to whatever they attack. If that's you, awesome, you're taking 30% less damage effectively. If it's not you, if it's your teammate or some random average Joe in the Wasteland, then it's just going to be helping out every single other player around you. So great perk, make sure you slot it on for this build. Next up we have Tenderizer, and same deal here, same concept. Whenever you damage an enemy, you make it take 10% more damage. This is just a great way for us to deal that little bit extra damage. Now enemies only ever take that 10% more damage on the second attack on that enemy, so you won't see this actually proc too often because we one-hit kill a lot of enemies. So you're not going to see this actually take effect. Unless it is a boss enemy that you cannot one-hit kill, because boss enemies are very tough, then you'll see it take effect and you'll see that 10% extra damage really shine through. Next up in Intelligence, we only need 3 points in here. We're just going to take max rank of Nerd Rage. This synergizes perfectly with our low health Bloodied playstyle. While below 20% health, which is the ideal health gate you want to set yourself, you gain 40 damage resistance, become a little bit more tanky, and you deal 20% more damage, and you regenerate your AP 15% faster. So a slew of bonuses there, all of which we will take gladly. Next in Agility, another perk line that got overhauled from my previous iteration. I've made a few adjustments here. We're going to take max rank of Action Girl or Boy, and that will just make us regenerate AP 45% faster. We're going to need it. We're going to be utilizing VATS a lot in this build. I'll go over why in the legendary perks section, but basically this is a must-have for the build. From there, we're going to be taking max rank of Adrenaline, massive damage perk. Every kill we do increases our damage by 10%. So after you kill 6 enemies, you're going to be dealing 60% extra damage. Massive. This is a, once again, must-have for the build. You're going to be killing enemies left, right, and center, and you will basically always see that max 60% damage bonus active at all times. Next up, we're going to be taking max rank of Dodgy. This is a very important skill as well. It's going to make us take 30% less damage from all enemies at the cost of 30 action points per hit. So while it does kind of go against our VATS AP sustain that we do want to keep up at all times, it is worth it for the extra tanking potential. We are low health, we are pretty much one good hit away from death, and this helps stave that off. Onto luck, we have max rank of Bloody Mess. I always put this in, even though it is only 15% bonus damage. It does matter and it does add up. I take every damage bonus perk in the game, and that's why my builds deal so much damage, because that's my focus. I always min-max towards damage, and the little things like this can add up. Now, if you don't want that extra 15%, if you say, it's not that much of a boost, I can go without. Sure, understandable. Next, we want max rank of Grim Reaper Sprint. Like I said, we're going to be utilizing VATS, and every time we kill an enemy, one hit kill an enemy, might I add, in VATS, can give us a 35% chance to restore all action points. Very, very insanely useful if we get it to proc after every kill. Unlikely, but if we do, that's going to be awesome. Next up is Serendipity. We want max rank of this. While below 30% health, we gain 45% chance to avoid damage. I mean, no brainer, you need this. We're going to be taking a lot of damage. It's almost a 50% chance to just take no damage whatsoever. So must have, chalk it on the build, you need it. In a similar vein, we're going to be taking Ricochet. Now this is going to give us a similar effect to Serendipity, but only for ranged weapons. An 18% chance to deflect back some of our enemies' range damage. Basically an 18% chance to take no range damage when it does proc. And it does have some synergistic properties, as I've made a video on. If you're holding a vampire's weapon, every time a bullet does get deflected back to its enemy, you will heal for 2% of your max health, along with a few other bonuses. So Ricochet is a must-have for this build. It vastly increases our survivability. And obviously, to finish off the luck and perk cards for this entire build, we need Star Chains at max rank so that we can keep our chosen mutations no matter what happens. Alright, so those were the perks. As you can see, a lot of thought has been put into this build to elevate it from ultimate to perfected. This is what I would call the next level for the Queen Killer build. Everything has been explained in the total static portion of the build, but if you would like some options to play around with, then here you go. Now when it comes to alternate ways to play the build, or alternate setups for your perks, it's pretty simple with this one. Just head on down to any of the perk punch card machines and do something like what I've done here. I've made a separate one for my Queen Killer one-handed and two-handed build. So if you prefer to play with one-handed weapons or maybe two-handed, go ahead and recreate the entire build and just use Expert, Master and Regular of Gladiator or Slugger instead of Barbarian, Blocker and Iron Fist for strength, and there you go, there's that alternate way set up completely. If you would prefer to play on your own instead of on a team, then slot out Suppressor and Stranger Numbers and chuck in Lone Wanderer, and that will do the trick for that one. However, I don't recommend playing this way, as the bonuses for playing solo do not outweigh the bonuses for playing on a team. It's just not worth it, so make sure you're on a team. Now again, if you would like a different playstyle, if you'd like to play more stealthily, then go ahead and drop 1 point from Perception, slot in Glow Sight, get rid of Grenadier, take away 3 points from Charisma, and get rid of Suppressor, chuck all those points into Agility, remove Dodgy, and then go ahead and slot in Escape Artist, Ninja, and Sneak. That will be the most effective way to play the stealth variant of this build. You can go ahead and mess around with some luck perks as well, like maybe you want to remove Ricochet for more better criticals or critical savvy or something like that as well. But by and large, this would be the better way to play it. So yeah, that's how you play this build with one-handed, two-handed, and also stealth. And additionally, it would be silly not to show off having a crafting version of this build. If you want to easily just slot in 5 points for Makeshift Warrior and create another separate loadout just so you can craft stuff, go ahead and do that as well. That won't hurt. Alright, alternative perk cards done and dusted. You can play stealthy if you wish, you can utilize legendary strength differently, and obviously use the perk loadout machine to create unique playstyles for this build, whether that be one-handed, two-handed, solo, on a team, or just utilize the crafting system. Now on to the next part, where we talk about the legendary perk cards. Obviously, you will have had to have been playing a character for a very, very long time and become over level 300 at the very minimum to achieve what I'm about to recommend. But once you do, it is truly worth it and will transcend your build's effectiveness like you wouldn't believe. Let's go. Alright, so firstly we have Hack and Slash. This is an absolute must-have for every melee build. I don't care what your goal is. Hack and slash, you got to have it on every melee build. So at max rank, it is a 50% chance for all melee and unarmed VATS attacks to do area damage. So what that basically is a massive cleave ability, an area of effect ability. This perk translates exactly the amount of damage you're doing to a single target in a massive 360-degree cleave area of effect. So if you're doing, let's say, 1000 melee damage to one enemy, and this procs when you use VATS, then you're going to be doing 1000 damage to all the other enemies that happen to be standing nearby. So yeah, this is an absolute must-have ability. It massively boosts our DPS potential and our crowd control ability. Next up, we have Exploding Palm. This honestly does something a little bit similar, but it only works for unarmed weapons. So basically, every time you punch something, whether that be in VATS or outside of VATS, you have a 20% chance to trigger an explosion. And this explosion can deal damage to the enemy and enemies around it. Essentially, just adding more damage onto our attacks, which we will always say yes to. 20% is not massive, but when it does proc, you will notice it. Additionally, this can proc at the exact same time as hack and slash. Both of these can proc on the same punch on the same target, both doing their effects at the same time. Now, the reason I recommended Grenadier in Perception for this build was because of Exploding Palm. Now, Grenadier does increase the area for hack and slash, but only visually. It doesn't actually increase the radius of your VATS attack that this thing procs. However, for Exploding Palm, it does. It does increase the radius, and it increases the inner point of that explosion, making it so that the enemies don't have to be standing quite as close to the initial target to be taking the full brunt of that damage. So Grenadier is just directly synergizing with Exploding Palm, making the explosions from this doubled in size, basically meaning you're dealing that massive amount of damage to a larger area of effect. Next up, we have taking one for the team. This is just one of the main reasons why we always play on a team. When you're on a team, enemies will take 40% more damage when they attack you. So be on a team, have an enemy hurt you in some way, and then bam, it takes 40% more damage from all sources, including yourself. So it's kind of a no-brainer for everyone in the team to be running this. It just makes the damage potential of the entire group so much more massive. And then up next we have Legendary Strength and Legendary Endurance. Obviously we're going to take both of these for the reasons I said before. Now you could go ahead and give yourself 15 base strength like I said at the start of this video, and then use Legendary Strength just purely as a card that gives you 50% more unarmed damage like I did in the previous iteration of this build. And doing that, you won't be able to make use of the 5 extra perk points for regular perk cards. However, this time around I'm not doing that. These two perks just give us 5 perk points each to play around with for our regular build and our regular perk cards. And then finally we have Collateral Damage. Now this card actually received a little bit of a buff recently. So before it used to be that enemies would only be able to explode if they were killed with a one-handed or two-handed weapon, but now this card also works with unarmed weapons. So at max rank, enemies killed with a melee and unarmed weapon have a 20% chance to explode. And this explosion deals a lot more damage than the Exploding Palm explosion. And also, Grenadier does also increase this one's explosion. So it is kind of nice to have tacked on. We basically have 3 explosive perks that can all detonate whenever. Hack and slash, whenever we're using VATS, it's a 50% chance to proc. Exploding Palm, 20% chance to proc just whenever we punch an enemy. And then whenever we kill an enemy, they have a 20% chance to explode as well. There's always going to be an explosion of some sort dealing massive amounts of crowd control damage. Now in my mind, I think that is really worth it to have these 3 active at all times. Like I said, you got 3 separate sources of massive crowd control, massive damage explosions. But I understand, like I said, if you do not want to rock Collateral Damage on top of everything else. If this one is not for you, then you can either slot in max rank of Retribution if you want a little bit more survivability, go ahead and block some attacks and you'll restore HP and AP. It's quite nice, quite niche, but it works and it's pretty nice. Or you can slot in max rank of Funky Duds to get 200 poison resistance. Now, a lot of you already know this, that poison is kind of the bane of bloody builds, that damage over time, be that poison or fire might I add. You could use Sizzling Style instead of Funky Duds depending on what you're doing, but the flame and poison damage over time effects in this game do annihilate a bloody build's health, and unfortunately the Queen Killer is no exception to this rule. So if you find yourself dying to damage over time, or you know you're going to be doing an end game event or expedition or boss fight that will have you encounter one of these dots, slot in Sizzling Style or Funky Duds. Now, 2 more recommendations if you don't want to use anything that I've just mentioned. Go ahead and slot in another special legendary card, be that Charisma, Perception, Intelligence, Agility, Luck, whatever. Max that out and then you can go ahead and utilize 5 more perk points in your regular perk card skill tree. Or if you're a little bit lazy and you can't be bothered farming for buffs, slot in Brawling Chemist and just use the combat enhancing chem that it gives you and you'll be right as rain. Alright, now with perks all out of the way, this brings us to the part of the video where we talk about mutations and why I have chosen specific ones. You may have noticed that Class Freak is not being used. That's a constant standard across all of my builds, simply because instead of taking every single mutation that exists in the whole game and just calling it a day, I actually choose mutations that, benefit the build. In short, the negative effects of the chosen mutations do not matter and do not actually hinder us, therefore we do not need Class Freak to reduce things that don't matter, because they are portions of the build that we are not making use of. Alright, let's go over the mutations. Firstly, we have Adrenal Reaction, which will increase our damage as our health gets depleted, kind of like a mini version of the Bloodied effect, and you really shouldn't run a Bloodied build without it. Next is Carnivore, because we will be using a lot of meat related buffs that really heavily benefit the Unarmed playstyle, so you need Carnivore to make those benefits ×2. Then we have Chameleon. I've always said this, it doesn't really matter, it has no negatives, it's just kind of there, so there's no reason not to use it, just if you don't have to use it either for that same reason. Basically doesn't do anything because we are never going to be naked and stationary, so yeah, I just have it there because why not. Next up is Electrically Charged. We're always going to be getting melee attacks on us, so having a chance to deal a little bit of random electric or energy damage back at them is going to be a pretty big bonus. And additionally, another reason why we have Grenadier. Grenadier actually boosts the electrically charged explosion, making it affect a lot more enemies in a larger radius. I know, crazy. After that, we have Grounded. There's no reason not to take this since we don't use guns, let alone energy guns, so having 50% less energy gun damage doesn't matter, so we'll just take that free 100 energy resistance. Herd Mentality is taken next because all of my builds from now on will always be in a team, so that is +2 to all of our special stats, which gets boosted to +3 when we are in a team with people with mutations, so we're not going to not take that. Marsupial increases our carry weight and jump height, kind of just a given for everything and everyone in Fallout 76 at this point. There's no one who doesn't use that. Then we have Plague Walker. There's kind of no negative effects to this one since you can't ever not get a disease. So when you do happen to accidentally get a disease, you might as well make that work for you in your benefit. Basically, the more diseases you accidentally get in your travels, you're going to be doing an area of effect cloud damage of poison around your character, which damages enemies that come into close contact with you. I mean, that kind of synergizes really well with us since we're melee, we're going to be close to enemies. If they happen to give us a disease, then we're going to slightly hurt them back. Next up, we have Speed Demon. We're definitely going to want to take this. It's going to help us close the gap between us and our targets a lot quicker. It maxes out our movement speed, so we have no need to take anything else in the game that increases our movement speed, because this maxes it right out. Next up is Talons. This is just going to directly increase our unarmed damage by 25% at base value. No reason not to take that. Massive free unarmed damage increase. Also, it makes all of our unarmed strikes, including ones when we're using things like the Power Fist, or maybe the Gauntlet or Deathclaw Gauntlet, whatever, it gives all of those a little bleed damage effect as well. So extra damage, we'll take that. Next we have Twisted Muscles. This just increases our melee damage by 25%, so not our unarmed damage, but all of our melee damage will get a nice little boost as well. But we can benefit from the chance to cripple targets' limbs more easily, so definitely going to want to take that. And then finally we have Unstable Isotope, the chance to irradiate melee attackers. Like I said for Electrically Charged, Grenadier also boosts this, so whenever an enemy does strike us with melee, we have a chance to erupt in a mushroom cloud and deal a small amount of explosive damage back at enemies. So if you've been keeping track, we have a lot of explosions that we can utilize in this build for a melee build. We've got 1 Hack and Slash, 2 Exploding Palm, 3 Collateral Damage, 4 Electrically Charged, and 5 Unstable Isotope. 5 separate explosions that can potentially proc off of us, and all of them get boosted in some way by Grenadier, except for Hack and Slash. In my eyes, all of them are pretty beneficial, so yeah, we're going to want to take all of them. So yeah, that's my chosen mutations and why we have them. Like I said throughout, everything is pretty much perfect. But if you would like to customize it and add or remove certain mutations, as is anything with this build, then feel free to. Next chapter we have weapons. This is arguably the most important item you'll have in your inventory. Obviously our chosen weapon class is unarmed, with melee 1 or 2-handed being a backup or secondary playstyle. But I don't recommend you do that, instead stick with unarmed. This build shines its brightest with unarmed. The chosen and ideal weapons will be the Gauntlet from the Settlers Wasteland expansion. This is without a doubt the best in-slot, highest damage dealing unarmed weapon in the whole game at the moment. Followed closely behind by the Power Fist, Deathclaw Gauntlet, and Bare Arm in that order. So yeah, like I said, try and aim for that Gauntlet from the Wastelanders expansion, but any of the other mentioned unarmed weapons will treat you fantastically in the meantime. With very minimal discernible differences between damage at the low level, it's only really at the min-max end game stage where you start to notice when the Gauntlet starts taking the lead and leaving the others in the dust in terms of damage. As for legendary effects on your chosen weapon, your main damage dealing unarmed weapon should have the Bloodied first star prefix effect. This is going to be the best in slot and deal the most damage with our chosen playstyle, dealing up to 95% more damage the lower our health gets. In the secondary star slot, you'll want to aim for 40% faster weapon speed. This will just increase your overall DPS and is probably the best in slot for this build in particular. However, if you'd like to customize the build and maybe focus on VATS criticals, or maybe even power attacking, then get the 50% extra VATS critical damage effect, or the 40% more power attack damage second star effects respectively. Either of those other options wouldn't be a bad choice either. Personally for this build, I'll stick with the swing speed 9 times out of 10 though. Then finally for that final star, there are only 2 options I'd recommend. Firstly and ideally, the +1 strength effect. As I've said throughout the video, we are wanting as much strength as possible, and this effect directly translates to 10% more unarmed damage for our weapon. And the other 3rd star effect I would recommend would be the 25% less VATS cost effect. As we do want to be utilizing VATS a lot on this build for hack and slash, this effect can be a massive helping hand. So yeah, that's the ideal weapon effects. Bloodied, faster swing speed, and +1 strength. This is what I would consider the absolute god roll effect for this playstyle. Now as a backup, I highly recommend that you carry around a Vampire's unarmed weapon to help keep you alive in those sticky situations where you need the extra survivability. Vampires heals you 2% of your max health per strike, and as you've seen through the video, it still deals respectable damage despite having no damage bonuses attributed to it. Additionally, in the case of backup weapons, as a melee combatant, you are kind of at the mercy of flying enemies, waiting for them to circle and eventually land, so that you can then damage them. As said in the alternative perks section, it is recommended that you carry around a shotgun to cripple Scorchbeast wings with the Enforcer perk to force a landing. Right, now this brings us to what modifications you should put on your melee weapons. It's pretty simple really. All melee weapons follow a trend of having a small amount of decent modification options, and then they will have that one modification that is objectively better than the rest. Now, I understand that finding, earning, or purchasing the perfect god roll weapon seems like an impossible task. Believe me, I do. Which is why I'm going to recommend that while you're grinding for your ideal god roll, you simply use whatever you can get your hands on, be that a 1-star bloodied weapon, or maybe one of the mentioned weapons without an ideal effect at all. Use what works and gets the job done for the time being. Luckily, Bethesda does have some choice weapons with guaranteed effects we can earn in the meantime as well. I highly recommend aiming to get your hands on the Unstoppable Monster Deathclaw Gauntlet from the Daily Ops while you grind for that perfect god roll gauntlet. Next up, we have armor. The armor is pretty straightforward. As you level up, you'll just have to use whatever you can get your hands on. But the ideal base armor set to be the cherry on top for this build will either be Secret Service or Brotherhood Recon armor. Both are gold bullion options that can be purchased or unlocked, and are both pretty much neck and neck for the best defense in the game when it comes to regular armor, so just take your pick. Personally, I stick with Secret Service armor. In saying that though, other notable choices do include the Thorn armor or Civil Engineer armor sets, if you really want to have an additional built-in set bonus that deals additional damage to melee attackers that are attacking you. As for legendary effects, it is straightforward as can be here. Your first star should always be Unyielding. This is what gives our Unarmed build the bulk of its offensive capabilities and is what synergizes so well for us. Anything else is straight up not worth it for this build. So with a full set, that is plus 15 to our strength, which is 150% more unarmed damage. From there, the second star effect we want on our armor is ideally the +1 strength effect. For obvious reasons. Having this on every piece of armor is another +5 to your strength, and another 50% to our unarmed damage. But in saying that, a damn close second choice would be the 5% faster AP regeneration effect. Then finally, the third star. Ideally for this playstyle, this is the only time I will ever recommend Cavalier, which grants a 75% chance for you to take 15% less damage while sprinting, per piece. Simply put, we want this because we are using melee and will be sprinting a lot. From one target to the next, we will be closing the gap to the enemies as fast as possible to minimize our time under fire and damage taken, as well as to maximize the amount of punches we can throw out at any given time. So yeah, the ideal effects for your armor for this build: Unyielding, +1 strength, Cavalier. Next, when it comes to under armor, there is no greater option for this build than the Shielded Secret Service under armor. It grants us the most defense as well as 4 extra strength and endurance points. 4 extra points means 40% extra unarmed damage, and that also means we get 20 extra hit points for our build. For the backpack, we simply want to main the armor plated one for more survivability. You should also keep a second backpack in your inventory, with the Chemist backpack being a close second option to hold our many chems and stimpaks that we will need to use on this build. As for armor mods, on your Secret Service, simply make it all buttressed for the highest defense. Then chuck on asbestos lining for the chest. This will help you with that fire from the roof in the cave during the Earl William fight, as it makes you completely immune to the damage those things produce. Another great option is to chuck on the biochem effect that increases the duration of all of your chems. I mean, if you're going to be taking buffs, that would be the go-to that I would use. Or maybe you can just say fuck it and chuck on a jetpack if you want to be a bona fide badass, fly around punching people right in the chin. For the legs, chuck on ultralight. That's all you'll need there, gives you 10 extra action points to work with. And finally, a combination of the weighted armor mod on one arm and the brawler armor mod on the other arm. The weighted mod grants 10% melee armor penetration, while the brawlers adds 10% unarmed damage just straight up. These two combined work out to be the best in slot for damage boosting potential, so make sure you have one of each. Now, as I said, while you're leveling up, it can be really hard to get the perfected gear I recommend. I understand, just use whatever you can for the time being, whether it's heavy combat armor with only 1 star, or like Unyielding, or maybe a set of random legendary effect Thorn or Secret Service armors. Just use whatever works and grind for that perfect set eventually in the future. Now as for buffs, these are a very important part of your build. If you put in the time and effort to collect and purchase the correct buff items, then you can overclock your character's performance in a magnitude of ways. But sadly, things have changed quite a bit since my last build video I made. Things no longer stack the way they used to. My old buff sheets are out of date, which is why I've enlisted the help of Kat and the legends over at Buffs N Brew. I'll have them linked below. Be sure to check them out on their website if you want to learn more about the game, or if you're in need of some choice buff items, then these legends can hand deliver them to your character for caps. They've also got a ton of handy visual guides to help you farm them yourself. The Buffs N Brews guys will be getting honorable mentions in all of my future build videos for providing such easy to follow buff cheat sheets for all of us to follow. Anyway, as you can see on screen, there is a slew of bonuses that melee builds can benefit from. Now, if you really wish to, for whatever reason, you could take one of each of these items on this list and benefit from them all at the same time. Different buffs can be combined as long as they don't grant the same effect. So this list shows us the best in-slot consumables that grant the highest of their respective effect. For the purposes of this build, we will mainly be concerned with buffs that boost strength, melee, and unarmed damage. From the list for food, we want to be taking Deathclaw Wellington for 3 strength, and any of the tasty variants of food dishes. Probably easiest is the Mutant Hound one for 85% melee damage. And how we may as well tack on more health and AP regen, so make sure you have some cranberry meatball grinders and either company tea or fried deer skins for AP regen. For chems, the only remaining option since they can't stack is Fury, granting 30% more melee damage. Then for alcohol, and wash it down with some vintage Nuka Shine for 100% more unarmed damage. Now all of these items are the ideal main ones I'd recommend for buffing your character, and as the list shows, you can increase the duration and effectiveness of most of these buffs with the Carnivore Mutation, Strange in Numbers, and the Backwoodsman 6 magazine. This is why we are a carnivore. All of these awesome food buffs can get doubled, and then some with the Strange in Numbers effect. As you can see clearly outlined on the sheet, all of these can be increased with certain perks, be that Cola Nut or Party Girl / Boy. If you want to boost them all to their maximum effect, then you can see what they go to and what their improved benefits become. And all of these maxed out are insanely beneficial, including the Deathclaw Wellington and Tasty Mutant Stew being boosted to granting us 11 strength and 318% melee damage. That's insane. Now on top of all this, you can still give yourself a bobblehead bonus and a different magazine bonus if you wish to. The unarmed bobblehead will be our go-to, that's going to increase our unarmed damage further. And for the alternate magazine option, you could go for Covert Ops 8, which will give you 25% more unarmed and knife damage. But I think you would get a lot more benefit from combining food buffs with the Backwoodsman 6 magazine, as that magazine does increase the effects of all your food buffs by 50%. And lastly, for the buffs section, don't forget that certain camp objects can help too, like the bench press will give you +2 strength, and if you have Maul as a camp companion, he will grant you a melee boost of 1 extra strength and also a unique effect that reduces the weight of your melee weapons by 30%. All of these are just nice little boosts that you can add on to your already insanely powerful character. Well, that does it guys. That is my perfect Queen Killer Brawler / unarmed build. I want to remind you all that the min-max objective for this build was maximum strength and maximum damage potential, without sacrificing any survivability and tanking potential. And I think this double dips as a fantastic endgame DPS and tank hybrid, if I do say so myself. Now the real time this build shines is crowd control, either in events, boss battles, or endgame content, usually killing multiple enemies with a single punch, and also the absolute just wow factor and satisfying nature of the build just makes it a lot of fun to play on. The only shortcomings are probably surprise radiation bombs or hard-hitting dots from fire or poison, which can be mitigated with funky duds or sizzling style if they become too troublesome, or you can just plan for them if you know what type of enemies you are coming up against. So that's it guys. If you're creating this for yourself, don't hesitate to return to the video if you need a refresher on information. I have the timestamps in the description alongside the ever so helpful build planner link from Nukes and Dragons that you guys can use if you wish. If this is your first time watching a tier build, then check out the playlist. I have a lot more ones waiting for you to check them out. That's going to do it for me. A massive shout out to all my current Patreons and channel members. You're all legends and thank you for your support. If you'd like to support me further, then consider becoming a Patreon or channel member or checking out my merch store. We've got a lot of great designs and benefits, so be sure to check that out in the description, along with my other social medias like Discord and Twitter. Subscribe if you're new, and like the video if you enjoyed. I've been Tia, and I'll catch you in the next one. Welcome to Valhalla.